This is VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker, and we're on the September 13th edition. What do we got? About 6 days until week 2 when the Vikings travel to the Philadelphia Eagles for a Monday Night Football game. And those Monday Nighters, historically, on the road, not good vibes. How do you feel about it? You think they're going to knock off the Eagles, who survived the Detroit Lions 38-35? We shall see. We'll get into some of the prediction stuff later this week. As I think a lot of you know, I write for VikingsTerritory.com, and I obsessively, maniacally, weirdly track all of the Vikings movement, the stats, people's opinion, the power rankings. And per EPA, per play, the defensive analytics metrics and offensive analytics metrics, the Vikings are the NFL's 4th best team on defense and 7th best on offense after week 1. You know, it's a small sample size, just a single game, but we track it all the time at VikingsTerritory.com. And heading into last week, the body politic of the NFL, ESPN, Bleacher Report, Pro Football Network, Pro Football Talk, 538, all of them came to a mathematical average that said the Vikings were about the 18th best team in the league. Like that, after beating the Packers, that climbed to the 9th best. If you scour any power rankings that always come out on Tuesday morning, the Vikings were among the biggest climbers and pretty significant in a bunch of them, some of them 13 spots on the ladder. So, predictably, what I have been saying, what you have been thinking, and you've been telling your pals and your loved ones, that this Vikings team is going to be pretty good. It just needs a new storefront, new management. Well, the rest of the world is understanding what you thought all summer based on the one game defeating the Packers. So, that's where we're at. The world's coming around. Now, they can't have a stinker against the Eagles, otherwise they'll fall all the way the hell back down to 15th or so, depending on how much they would lose by. But hey, let's think that they're not going to lose. I think our final segment, at least from me personally as a standalone host on Packers week, is right now. I want to go through the things that were surprising, and then I think tomorrow with Josh Fry, he'll do both. He'll talk about the Packers, preview the Eagles. So I want to go through the 7 most surprising things to my eyeballs about Vikings-Packers going down the line in no order of priority or importance. Let's start with tight ends. This one was surprising. For 4 straight summers, we have speculated that Irv Smith is going to break out and be a fantasy god. He's built like a wide receiver, and damn it, he's going to have 10 touchdowns and 800 yards. Well, they hardly used him in week 1. Instead, they put on the Johnny Munch show, and I guess he was decent. He didn't do too much, nor did Irv Smith. I mean, Irv Smith played a little bit. But when asked about it after the game, Kevin O'Connell said, oh, yeah, this was basically a Johnny Munch game. He fit better with the scheme, which makes you scratch your head to say, what are we doing here, fellas? Why isn't Irv Smith mixed in? I guess you just have to have hope or faith that he will be intertwined in the offense at some point. But out of the gate, in probably the most important game of Kevin O'Connell's career, he said, I don't need Irv Smith, at least to the magnitude we expected him to be involved. This is also a precursor that Irv Smith's contract year is now, and if he continues to get a shitty amount of targets, he ain't going to play here anymore. He won't want to play here anymore. So you have to start thinking about, from this McVay-O'Connell offense, last year's tight end with the Rams was Tyler Higbee and Johnny Munch. They may not need to break the bank on a tight end. So for broad-reaching future scaling implications, if you're an Irv Smith guy or gal, you might want to be a little anxietal, because if they ain't going to use him, he ain't going to want to stay here. So not to put a bunch of fear after a fabulous week 1 victory, but it was of the utmost surprise that Irv Smith was basically TE2. Very weird, especially according to snap count. Munch was the TE1, so take that as it may be. The next one, number 2, is that at least for this first game, and perhaps further on down the line, because hey, this first game went pretty well, Dalvin Cook did his damage, and it was really quiet. I think he ended up with 108 yards, or 118 or 108 yards from scrimmage. I can't remember the exact figure right now. Did it feel like it? No. He certainly did not have a poor game. He had a really good game. He just didn't score, and he wasn't the focal point. And you, in your living rooms, watching these Vikings since, I guess, 2017 with Dalvin Cook's entry into the NFL, he was the guy. If he wasn't cooking, no pun intended, then they weren't going to win. Well, this is different. Cook's going to be a normal running back in terms of utilization. And then, hey, by the way, if they win because Kirk Cousins is finding a wide open Justin Jefferson, great. But Cook is no longer the showstopper. And I couldn't believe when I looked at the stats when I got back home that he had 100 and something yards from scrimmage. And what do we say? Nobody cared. Flat out. Didn't feel like it. Alexander Mattison played decent too when he was given snaps. But I want to give you a disclaimer that while Dalvin Cook will be utilized, and I'm sure he'll get 1,000 yards rushing if he stays upright, the way that he's showcased, it will feel quiet because, at least in my opinion, maybe you'll disagree wildly and spout off in the comments. It felt like Cook was a footnote in the offense, but a marvelous one. So be prepared for that. This might be the new way of it, that they're passing the ball, and if Cook's available for a few handoffs, great. He got 20 against the Packers. Number 3, bang on serious wood here. You have a kicker and a punter that you can rely on. I talked yesterday about personally not having any butterflies in my stomach when Joseph came up to take a stab at the 56-yarder, and I was vindicated. He made it, and the people around me were like, all right, attaboy. It wasn't a big like, oh my God, he made that 56-yarder. This guy's here to stay. Because of what we saw in training camp, preseason, especially in Denver, Joseph stepped up to the plate, knocked it out of the park, and we're like, yep, he's a pretty damn good kicker, the South African that we got. Same goes for Ryan Wright. I think he had a 46 point something average. I can't remember the exact number, but he had a fabulous punt yards per punt average. And like in the blink of an eye, almost in a preseason, we decided that we have a good kicker and punter. I can tell you that if I chatted with each and every one of you in May when they signed that Gabe Burchich dude who later went to the Packers and got cut, nobody would be like, oh yeah, Jordan Berry and Greg Joseph, baby. We got this. It was all big, like, hopefully they don't suck. Hopefully they don't break our hearts. Well, all of a sudden, after that Bronco game, and then now confirmed at least for a single game, the kicker and the punter look good. They're an asset, not like just some entities waiting to shatter your dreams. And that is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Now, when the game's on the line, fourth quarter, walk-off field goal, I can assure you you'll have butterflies because that's what you do. That's what I do. But right now, it feels, after a preseason and a week 1 triumph for the Packers, we got a pretty good kicker and punter, and we didn't used to feel that way. Number 4, there were no sightings of the speed demons. Ty Chandler, Kene Nwangwu. We talked about how many months? My goodness, I guess since Chandler was drafted in April, are they going to utilize this deadly speed, especially from Nwangwu? And I should say there were Nwangwu sightings on special teams, but we knew that was coming. The great mystery of whether or not O'Connell was going to use these running backs. They kept 5 of them, including C.J. Ham, for God's sake. They must have got a special plan for them. Nope, not in the first game. The running backs, the RB, I guess that would be RB3 and 4. Nope, didn't do much. And so I think the implication is that if you're good enough to beat the Green Bay Packers 23-7 without Chandler or Kene, then I don't know how much they'll be used. Kind of like Irv Smith. It's not breaking news that an RB4 wasn't used. However, they kept all of these guys, and I thought they were going to have, a decent reason for it. But we might have to face the reality that Chandler and Nwangwu won't do a whole lot on offense because last time you checked, looks at notes, they have Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison. The takeaway was that there was no secret mix-in of the speed guys, at least in week 1. Next, it's hard to put into words, so I'll do my best. Don't call me a fool. If you would have told any one of us a week ago right now that the Vikings would hold the Packers to 7 points, you would have been like, good God, that defense must be fantastic. Well, it was, but it didn't feel like a 2017 Zimmer defense where it was stifling and hellfire. They gave up a lot of chunk plays, and thankfully, kind of like getting confused because Russell Wilson plays now, kind of like Seattle last night, they were opportune. They didn't put the clamps on the Packers at all times, but when it mattered, they stopped them. So there's this weird dynamic that they gave up a bunch of chunk plays and missed tackles, but still only allowed 7 points. So the surprising takeaway is how in the hell do you have a defense that it felt pretty good, but only allowed Rodgers 7 points? It's a weird dynamic that you'll have to monitor because we might have a Belichickian bend but don't break defense, which he showcased some of those years with the Patriots. But just calling out the surprising factor that Rodgers was held to 7 points, but to me, it didn't feel like the defense was like what we were accustomed to in the 2017 season and parts of the 2018 season. So it's just a strange thing to watch. Is the defense really good, or was it every dog has its day with a couple turnovers against the Packers? Winding down the show, the penalties, they only had 3. And there was only a handful of games in 2021 where they had that or fewer. And this, yes, teams go through games where they only have 3 turnovers. That's good. That's what you want. However, this was a rookie head coach that in theory could have fostered an undisciplined team and, would pop off like the Broncos did for last night for 11 or 12 penalties, whatever they ended up with. But not these Vikings. From 2014 until 2020 with Zimmer, the Vikings were well coached in the sense they didn't get penalized too much. You might be cynical and be like, of course they did. Not really, not by the numbers. However, in 2021, yes, the penalties were a son of a gun. And they were, I think, sunk the Vikings to like the 7th worst via penalty yards in the NFL. They flipped the script in week 1 here, only had 3. So it's a very good omen and indicator that this O'Connell dude might know what he's doing if in his the biggest moment of his professional life as an adult only allowed his team to have 3 penalties. So just more good news to pile on. I would have expected in a rookie coach's first game with a team that had problems with penalties the year prior that they would have had 7 or 8. No cigar, only 3. And finally, my number 7, most surprising takeaway that we learned that we didn't know a week ago about the 2022 Vikings is that our honeymoon for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell was justified. Again, how many times have I said this on the show? At least for a single week. It could all come crashing down in the next month. However, out of the gate, every morsel of optimism, excitement that you had was vindicated. They were job ready. There was a few times on these telecasts that I told you this guy, O'Connell, he could suck. He could look like Nathaniel Hackett last night. Fish out of water. Trying a 64-yard field goal for a win. Like, who? Why? Why? They could have been doing shit like that, but they didn't. All of the focus that you had about, all right, we like this O'Connell hire. It was time to move on from Zimmer. It was, 7 months of us saying the good part of how this could look could be the offense cooks, the defense shores up its bullshit in the final 2 minutes of halves, the kicker and the punter are suddenly good. But that all could have been wrong against a primary foe in the Packers. Alas, it was not. O'Connell, in his very first day on the job, when it mattered, looked the part, won the game, and then after sounded like what everybody wanted to hear, this beacon of positivity. So I leave you with that. The honeymoon that a lot of us embarked on since he was hired in February against the Packers, it was justified. The honeymoon is not over, and that includes Kwesi Adofo-Mensah because this is his roster now. About 60-70% of it is Rick Spielman's, but Adofo-Mensah enhanced it with additions like Zadarius Smith, and Jordan Hicks had a bunch of tackles too. So, Irv Smith, a footnote, nobody really cared. Johnny Munt was the TE one. Nobody wants to say that out loud, but that was the truth. Dalvin did his damage, but it was really quiet, so perhaps that's the theme in this system. You have a kicker and a punter you can rely on. Who to thunk it? We didn't know that. July 1st, we know it now, at least through one game against the Packers. We didn't have any sightings from the Speed Goblins, Ty Chandler or Kene Nwangu, at least on offense. We thought perhaps they'll be mixed in. Vikings had this weird thing where they gave up a bunch of chunk yardage, but the defense still allowed 7 points. It's something to monitor if that is a season-long theme, or if they get their shit together and don't allow those chunk plays, or come back to earth and they're just an average defense. There was only 3 penalties. Last year there was a lot more than that per game, so it was a good opening salvo for O'Connell to not have a team that was running all over the place, doing God knows what with God knows who. And then the very long honeymoon for the new head coach offensive-minded dude from the Los Angeles Rams, it was justified. He got the W in Week 1 at his building against the most hated arch rival. I'm Dustin Baker. That's VikesNow. Tomorrow we'll have Josh Fry, and we'll go over a little bit more Packer stuff because I'm sure he wants to sound off, and then we'll pivot to the Eagles for the rest of the week. Skol, baby.